First of all, I want to welcome Christopher Martin, who is a long time and good friend of mine. And I don't know if you all know how long we've been friends, but it's now, half my lifetime. Christopher and I met when we were at Yale Divinity School together. And I got to know him and his new young wife at that point. And then we were both assigned to our very first parishes, which were right next to each other. Christopher was the curate at the Cathedral in Hartford, and I was the curate at the church in West Hartford. So we started meeting to support each other, learning how to be baby priests. And then Christopher has always been an amazing visionary and thinker. And so one of the things that he started that I was so privileged to be part of was something called Gathering the Next Generation. We both noticed when we were young priests that there were very few young priests across the Episcopal Church at the time. And Christopher started a national movement called Gathering the Next Generation, where we challenged the national church to ordain more young people. And that was just an amazing and very fruitful movement. And then throughout the years, Christopher and I have kept in touch and kept as friends. He's the godfather of my son, Jake, and I'm the godmother of his son, Simon. So, and then I was privileged to be part of this other movement that Christopher started, which many of you are familiar with, called the Restoration Project, which was the title of Christopher's first book, and which is the launching and fostering of discipleship groups throughout the Episcopal Church. So Christopher has been to the Cathedral a couple of times, has been to our diocese to speak, and he is a wonderful teacher and educator. So it's just been an honor to be your friend, Christopher, and it's such a joy to have you here tonight.
Thank you, Kate. It's an honor to be here and to see some familiar faces from my visits at Jacksonville and some new faces and people from other areas as well. And for those of you who weren't on earlier in the call, it's a real delight to have Karen Edie Woodward, who was part of my 20s, 30s group at All Saints Beverly Hills. So we're representing the West Coast here this evening.
Yay, that's good. So Christopher, many of us are familiar with the Restoration Project and the premise of really getting people back to the basic tenets and practices of the faith through these discipleship groups. Can you talk a little bit about how the movement of the Restoration Project and the process of being in a discipleship group led to the writing of this book?
Sure. Well, Kate was part of the group that helped formulate these 7 vows in the first place. When I first invited Kate to join me at Church of the Savior in Washington, D.C., I had in mind only 3 vows, which were to pray, worship, and serve. And Kate said, I'd love to join you, but only if you add a vow about money, because money is where the rubber hits the road, and that's what Jesus talks about most. So I said, deal. And we met in Washington, D.C. and said, okay, we've got these 4, what else really needs to be here? And so we added the others. Obviously, we needed to do one about scripture and a commitment to the group. But then we were in Washington, D.C., sitting at the feet of Gordon Cosby, who had really been an innovator in structured small groups for maturity and mission. And he made it really clear that an important part of maturing as a Christian is becoming clear about call, what it is that God would have you do in each season of your life. And so that was one of the vows that we came up with. And it was a beautiful vow. It was, by God's grace, I will listen for God's call on my life, confident that I have been given a manifestation of the Spirit for the common good, entrusting my discipleship group to test and support that call. Well, 2 years ago, we had a conference here in San Rafael for about 40 people who were in discipleship groups from around the country. And we broke into small groups to have discussions about each of the vows. And 6 of those discussions were terrific. People knew exactly what they were talking about. They were energized, they were creative. The one that went nowhere was the one on call. And this was despite years of teaching on it, preaching on it, giving examples, and lay people consistently felt like it didn't apply to them, and priests weren't able to talk about it personally beyond that time when they felt called to ordination. So it felt clear to me that, especially given how important it was, to Gordon Cosby, who inspired so much of this work, that we needed to go back to the drawing board and figure out another way to approach this idea of call, because it just didn't seem to be working. So I started trial and error, running ideas, putting ideas up the flagpole and seeing what worked. And so we eventually rewrote the vow so that it now says, by God's grace, I will do the work God sends me to do this week, remembering Jesus says, as the Father has sent me, so I send you, entrusting my discipleship group to test and support that work. And then this book was written in support of that vow. What does that mean? What's the action that you need to take? What does it look like this day or this week to do the work that God has given me to do? So that's what inspired it, this sense of frustration and being at a dead end.
So it was really people's lack of clarity that inspired you. That's wonderful. Christopher, could you unpack a little bit more for us the distinction between vocation and work, or call and work? Can you unpack that for us a bit?
Sure. For those of you who've dipped into the book, you may have seen right at the beginning that one of the ways of proceeding through the book is to be very precise about the meanings of particular words. Some of them are familiar words, some of them less so. But in the course of the book, I really want to encourage people to think of work as just the next thing that you're supposed to do. One of the practices in the second chapter is to really think of the work is very near you, and it's not works plural. It's like, what's the next discrete thing that I am to do? And to imagine that that's the work that God would have you do. And that could be anything from preparing a bagel in the morning so that you can have the nutrition to go out to meet the rest of your day, to a surprise encounter that you have with somebody, and that becomes the work that you're supposed to do in that moment. So I'm really trying to break it down and make it a small moment by moment thing. You can have it be a little bit larger so that it's something that's in your discipleship group that you're discussing. So, you can say to your discipleship group, I think my work this week is so-and-so. And then your discipleship group can ask you, well, how did that thing go? So I'm trying to separate it from the idea of vocation or career or even call. It's kind of like starting from the basement level and then building up.
Yeah, so it seems like you're getting granular. I mean, the basic idea is that God is interested in everything we do and calling us to every action we take, as opposed to just the time when I'm going to go on a mission trip or I'm going to work at a homeless shelter. But every single action could be quote unquote work. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
It's interesting, Christopher. I was listening to a podcast by Brene Brown recently, and she said that what was needed to heal our society, which has become so consumed and obsessed with politics and feelings and all that, was accountability as opposed to shame. Can you elaborate how this relates to your book and the life of prayer, and how you focus on practice as opposed to feeling or having an experience of God?
Yeah, a couple of really interesting questions in there. Accountability is essential to the restoration project, right? The small groups, you're saying these vows regularly. And if you build a sense of affection and trust with your discipleship group, with that comes a sense of accountability. You can say to your discipleship group, this is what I'm struggling with right now. And your discipleship group can say, well, how is it going with that thing? But the key is to be able to do that without a sense of shame. And I try so hard in this book to make sure that when you're implementing these practices, for example, that you just give them a try without a sense of intensity or a sense of work or a sense of failure to it. It's like, you just got to try it. Shame is something that doesn't provoke behavioral change in us. It makes us feel caught rather than inspired to do a next thing. But I think there's a lot of power in accountability, and it can be a little scary thing to step out and say, I need to work on my prayer life, or I need to find a place to go and serve the poor, and have people hear that and know that you're going to go back and see them again. But that's how we grow.
It reminds me of the AA movement. They hold each other accountable in those small groups. Yeah. when you talk about your practices, Christopher, you use the word gentle a lot. Can
Yeah.
you tell me why you chose that particular word?
A couple of different reasons. One is that I knew right from the start, I had already talked, well, the tagline for the Restoration Project is restoring ourselves and our communities through 7 core Christian practices. And I wanted a word to help distinguish the practices I was introducing in the book from the core practices of the 7 vows. So I knew I needed to qualify it in some way. But then it was a question of market testing. When I first started teaching these practices, I introduced them as playful practices. And what I meant by that was, well, in a way, to back away from any sense of shame. I wanted there to be a sense of play, of freedom, of childlikeness. And I very quickly found out that there was an incredibly gendered response to the notion of playful practices. That the men who I was training in this all kind of got what I was going for and could run with it right away. It didn't work for any of the women. And so it became clear that I needed to find, we needed to find another word that got at the same kinds of ideas that I was going for. And eventually, together, we came up with gentle practices, which again moves away from this sense of like, this is a thing you must do, or it's a bad thing if you don't implement it, it's a shame. And rather, it's something that that's not forced. And it gets at my underlying assumption that these practices are something that lie close to hand for all of us. It's not something that we grasp after or attain, but it's just something that we reveal. And describing the practices as gentle gets at that kind of a dynamic for introducing them into your spiritual life.
That's interesting that you chose the word playful. It brings to mind, Jesus saying, let the little children come to me, or you must be like a little child, that we should approach these practices with that kind of childish joy or playfulness. That's wonderful. I love that. Well, you also recommend that we bind a particular prayer into our daily routine. This prayer that you talk about being sent into the world to love and serve with gladness and singleness of heart. How did you choose that particular prayer, and why is that particular prayer so important?
The notion of living with gladness and singleness of heart, I'd always found very compelling. And there a lot of Episcopalians over the years have picked up on that language that comes from the post-communion prayer. And that seemed to describe the fruit of doing the work that God calls you to do. And when I looked at it, I looked at our 2 post-communion prayers, and I realized that if I just put the 2 of them together, I could create one prayer. Oh God, send me this day to do the work you have given me to do, to love and serve you with gladness and singleness of heart. And the notion of setting an intention first thing in the morning, that's part of what you're going to be doing through the course of the day, I also found very stirring. So, and I adore the language of our Book of Common Prayer. And I feel like I mature as a Christian the more I internalize those words and live them. So I just have this deep trust of them.
And you talk about binding the prayer. I love that term, binding. Can you unpack that a little bit more for us? How do we bind it to ourselves?
Well, I'm sort of reminded of the Jewish custom of binding, literally binding onto your body, the prayer that you're going to be saying, and just to have it close to hand. And if you have it every day, that this is one of the things that you do, then there is a sense that it's very close to you in that moment, and then hopefully throughout the course of your day.
And don't you even suggest that we might write it and put it on our mirror or something physical too, to bind it nearby, have it nearby?
Yeah. I mean, one of my suggestions, particularly if you're not already in a rhythm of daily prayer, is to start off by writing it in your best handwriting, or in my case, there is no best handwriting, so I'd have to type it with a cool calligraphy or something. And then to tape it on your bathroom mirror, and then as you're putting down your toothbrush before you're going out to the day, look at the prayer and say it. Oh God, send me this day to do the work you have given me to do, to love and serve you with gladness and singleness of heart. You know, another thing I love about the prayer is you're sitting there at the beginning of your day and you're saying to do the work you have given me to do. So there's this sense that like God already knows to some degree the work that you're going to be facing in a way that you don't, that God's shaping hand is going to be before you this day. And for me, that's a reassurance, right? It could be, it is for me a kind of de-stressor. Like I'm constantly thinking about the work that I need to do and the rest of it, but to think that there's a work that God would have me do through the course of the day, I find a reassurance.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Talk about the 20 minutes. You talk about praying for a minimum of 20 minutes a day. Can you help us understand why that amount of time in particular is important?
I think that's the leading edge of the whole notion of the Restoration Project, to get into that rhythm of 20 minutes a day of prayer. It is specific. The sister of the woman who is the head of my altar guild, the Altar Guild of St. Paul's, is the head of the Altar Guild in her church up in Washington. And when she first heard it, she just rebelled. She's like, he can't tell me what to do. And Judy had to make it clear right away. She's like, look, he's not telling you what to do. You can do whatever you want with that 20 minutes. You can stand on your head and say things in foreign languages if that feels like prayer to you. All he's saying is set aside 20 minutes. And the 20 minutes is not arbitrary. Fuller Seminary did research some years ago, and they discovered that people who pray for 20 minutes or more a day have a much higher level of prayer satisfaction than people who pray less than that. So this is just what makes us happy. And we know from physical exercise that if you run around for 10 minutes, that's fine, but it's not until you get your heart rate up from something like 18 minutes and 46 seconds that the health benefits last throughout the next day. So there's something about this 20-minute chunk of time that makes a difference. I've also discovered through years of teaching that most people will either settle into doing a 20-minute sit like the Thomas Keating teaches, an open mind, open heart, or if you do everything that's in the morning prayer in the Book of Common Prayer, that tends to take about 20 minutes. So there's something deeply right about 20 minutes or more of praying a day. And that really, again, sets a tone for the day.
Yeah, that's helpful. That's very helpful. Talk to us about your trip to walking the Camino. You refer to your Camino boots. Can you tell us more about that story? I love that story of your journey with Scott, although you don't mention his name in the book.
Yeah, it is Scott, and I mentioned it twice. It was a transformative experience for me. Have any of you made the Camino across northern Spain, the pilgrimage route? I can only see some of the screens here. It's a Christian
I don't think anyone
pilgrimage.
has.
Well,
I have a friend that has. Donna's
well,
son. Donna's on here.
Okay. Well, it was a transformative experience for me. The Camino, the most popular pilgrimage route in the Middle Ages was to Santiago de Compostela, where the church remembers that St. James' bones are. And people would start wherever they lived in Europe, and they would eventually find their way to sort of major pilgrimage routes, the most popular of which starts in Roncesvalles and has you going over the Pyrenees along northern Spain, heading out westward towards Compostela. Scott and I started in León, which was about 2.5 weeks out at a pace of 14 or so miles a day. And there's a whole lot of wisdom about how you do the Camino, how you dress, what goes in your backpack. And Scott and I attended to all of that. And we knew that the most important thing was to break in your boots ahead of time. And Scott got new boots, and then life happened and he wasn't able to break them in. And sure enough, within 3 or 4 days, his feet were an absolute wreck. blisters, and we had been doing 14 miles a day. All of a sudden we were doing 5 or 6 as he sort of hobbled along and built up his strength. I share that story because there's a sense of real intentionality in being on the Camino. You're headed towards St. James, and it's the boots that get you there step by step by step. And well broken in boots is the real engine of your pilgrimage experience. And what I suggest is that daily prayer, weekly worship are like our Camino boots in progressing and maturing in the spiritual life. If you have these things well broken in your life, you're going to be able to mature with greater ease and implement the gentle practices and have them go deeper in your life and have more intimate relationships with the people in your discipleship group and have more powerful worship experiences and so forth. So those two in particular, prayer and service, I compare to the Camino boots, the things that are just most important on your pilgrimage way.
That's a great analogy for these practices, that we need them for the journey. They strengthen us and give us really protection in a way, don't they? From this life is pretty crazy, and these practices sort of anchor us like a boot sort of supports your foot. You need that boot.
They ground us, right?
They ground you.
Keep us on the ground, keep us moving forward.
Yes. Another image that you use, which I loved so much, was this concept of theotropic, which I hadn't heard before, but I love it. Can you tell a little bit more about that in the sunflower?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Part of what I loved about the word theotropic is I hadn't known it either. And in fact, the spell correct on my computer doesn't think that it's a word, but it is. And so sunflowers are heliotropic. They're designed such that they always tilt towards the place where there's the greatest amount of sun. That's the way they were created by God. We human beings are theotropic. We were meant to tilt towards God. And what I love about the image is not only the freshness of the word, that it's a new word, it also just gets at something I think is really important, which is that the desire for God is something that's deep in each one of us. It's not something that we need to go somewhere else to get or acquire. So it's true about ourselves. It's also a word in the gentle practice in the book. It's a word I invite you to remember when you're looking at human faces, because it's something that's true of each human being. It's a beautiful thing that's true of each human being. And, of course, if you go by a field of sunflowers, they really are all tilted in the same direction. If you went by a field of human beings, we'd be tilted all over the place because we have free will. And so not all of us, so many of us struggle against the way we were created to be, which is tilted towards God. So it seems to me to have a lot of, there's a lot to play with. It's a way of, in my first book, I keep reminding the reader that Genesis teaches that we were made in the image and likeness of God. It's similar to that, but then it also brings in an element of yearning and desire, that I'm drawn towards, that seems to me accurate. I find it just a stirring image, a reminder of the desire that's built in me and the confidence that desire is correct, right? That's how I was created. That's how each of us was created.
I love the idea of these practices being like boots or containers so that our self can tilt to God safely. Part of what happens is we get so disturbed by or distracted by the world, we forget to tilt, or we don't tilt, but maybe these practices can give us the safety to just do what comes naturally. I like that very much.
Yeah.
It's as if, Christopher, you're using everything that we encounter daily, from the people we see to the interruptions in our lives, as moments of opportunity for active prayer. How do you see this happening in your own life?
One of the biggest fruits for me of actually practicing these practices, the second gentle practice is to name each work. So to start getting in the habit of slowing down and not trying to do multiple things at a time, it's to name each work. So, you know, I'm toasting the toast, I'm pouring milk in my cereal. I mean, really slow down and deliberately just do one thing at a time. And so I started implementing that and really articulating what it was I was doing one step at a time. And after I didn't know whether it was really having a deep effect or not. And then I took Simon, your godson, on a college tour. And usually when I go through airports, it is a time of maximum stress for me. I'm afraid somebody's going to pick my pocket. I'm afraid I'm going to miss the airplane. It's all so overstimulating for me. But I started implementing the gentle practices. I'm walking across the street. I'm putting my credit card in the ticket machine. I'm standing in line to go through. And Simon was stressed out. He is my son. So he was stressed out the way I usually am. And I found an unusual sense of calm that came over me just by doing this one deliberate thing at a time. I felt more present to it, and I felt more present to him, and I was able to be a relaxed presence for him. So that's just one illustration of how this gentle practice of sort of slowing down and allowing it to be one intentional thing at a time made for a sort of prayerful experience, mindful experience, if you will.
Yeah, that's a great example. So, and you talk about it in your book, you name the exact thing that you're doing in order to be fully present to that thing. Is that the purpose behind the naming, is just to bring your mind into focus?
Well, so in my book, what I'm striving for in the chapters is to have something be really self-evident the first time you read it. Each chapter is only about 10 pages long, but then I also invite, I usually have some pretty rich quotes, either from scripture or Christian poets or something like that, to invite you to go deeper with it. The same thing's true of this exercise of naming. I mean, at the first instance, we start at that level of like, I'm buttering the toast. But then there can also be the activity of naming things in a more rich way. So I give the example of, I have a very difficult time keeping people who aren't church members or families of the preschool from parking in my parking lot and then using it to go to the hair salon or the church next door or whatever. And I was perennially afraid of some of those confrontations of people. And I discovered, as part of this practice, that if I thought of the word boundary, like I am holding a healthy boundary on behalf of my parishioners and the families of this preschool, I found I was able to be a calm, strong presence, asking people not to park there, and take the inevitable hot insults that I got. What kind of a Christian are you, not letting me park here? I'm wearing the collar and you're so angry. And I'm like, I knew I wasn't. I was just holding a boundary. And that word boundary had a richness to it that allowed me to stand in that authority. So it can be not only that moment by moment, it can also be adding words that give a certain quality that may be more graceful than what you were doing before.
Yeah, that's very empowering to think about what it is you're actually doing rather than the practicality of it, the meaning behind it, the holding of that boundary. That's powerful. Yeah. So one of the premises of the book is that God is interested in everything we do. God is interested in us buttering our toast or washing the dishes, which I think, Christopher, is so very enriching during the pandemic in particular. Do you feel like this is a book that was called to be written during the pandemic, or have you ever pondered that?
Yeah, absolutely. There are 3 or 4 illustrations. So in the book, I bring in people's experiences, and several of them have very much to do with being in pandemic and the different kinds of decisions that we've made. So it's very woven into it for sure. Well, for example, Brigitte very much took the shelter-in-place order to heart and really slowed her life down. She's in her 80s and starting to have a hard time with balance. So she started to do this name each work thing as she was going up and down stairs. And after several weeks, she called me up and said, Christopher, you need to take this to convalescent centers and tell people about this thing, because my confidence going up and down the stairs now that I'm naming each work is much higher, just slowing down and doing it. So there is something about pandemic that's forcing so many of us to slow down and experience things with new intentionality.
Yeah, and be present to the smaller things in life, with an awareness that we were so busy before, we didn't have that opportunity. Yeah. The book is also really geared towards those who are in a stable life, who are not, without a home or challenged by hunger or trauma, or who have severe mental health issues. What would you say to those people? Could they adopt some of these practices, or how could this book be something that they could approach?
Well, I think you're right. The book as a whole has a real kind of Benedictine sensibility that it assumes a certain level of a rhythm to your life and attending to those things, and not everybody has that. So I think if you're going to read the book all the way through and really try on the different gentle practices and see which ones fit and which ones don't, that may be beyond folks in certain kinds of circumstances. On the other hand, I wonder if some of the gentle practices in isolation may be exactly what some of the folks who are struggling with particular issues may need. I just heard recently, after you sent me that question, Kate, thank you for sending the questions ahead of time so I had a chance to ponder them. I heard a psychologist who works with people who have experienced trauma describe one of the most effective exercises she uses with people who have been traumatized. She invites them to imagine that they are a zebra at a watering hole, and they want to go down and have water, but zebras at watering holes know that there are lions around. So you need to look around before you go down to have the water. And the exercise is very specific. You are to, in the room where you are, if you're somebody who's experienced trauma and is untrusting, you are to turn your head like this and name what you see. And then slowly turn your head like this and name door handle, bookcase, chair, and till you're all the way here. And evidently this really works with people who've been traumatized, to build a sense of trust, of knowing like, I'm okay in this environment. And it's that act of looking and naming. Well, that's very close to this notion of the work is very near you. So I'm hopeful that, because I believe these gentle exercises, gentle practices reveal things that are true of each human being, who made in the image and likeness of God, theotropic and so forth, that while not all of the gentle exercises may be applicable, that among the 5 or 6 practices that are in there, there may be something that really helps.
And Christopher, you might say also that this book could inspire someone to seek that stability, or to give thanks for even a small amount of it, a roof over the head, or a meal on the table. Yeah. That stability is an important piece in the spiritual life. Yeah.
I think what I suggest is that saying the daily prayer is the foundation on which all the gentle practices are built. So I would hope that people in almost any circumstance, just like they can say the Lord's Prayer, could tag on, "Oh God, send me this day to do the work you have given me to do, to love and serve you with gladness and singleness of heart."
Yeah. So what are your hopes for this book? What do you think is the work that God is calling for this book?
I hope a number of things. I hope that people are drawn to it and find that it works in their life, and that they want to know more. My huge ambition is to shift the practice and structure of the Episcopal Church, to shift the practices so that Episcopalians practice the 7 core Christian practices as often as they crack open a book of common prayer or go to church or do any of the other Episcopalian sorts of things. And that small groups, discipleship groups, are as known a commodity as parishes, missions, cathedrals, that this is just part of who we are and what we do. And I hope that this new invitation to consider practices and enter into them themselves gives new energy to that effort to shift the practices and structure of the church. And I believe that it's laying a foundation for other kinds of great work that we also want to do, whether it's racial reconciliation or evangelism or whatever the other work that it is that we're called to do, that this foundation of discipleship groups, people practicing these 7 core Christian practices will enable us to do all the other sorts of things that we feel called to do as church.
That's wonderful. Well, let me open the floor a bit. I have more questions I could pose, but I bet there are some questions out there. If you raise your hand and remember to unmute yourself, we would love to hear from you if you have a thought or feedback or a question. Laura, you need to unmute. There you go. Good job.
I would like you to go a little deeper into the piece about call and give me some help understanding like what other people have had issues with and how they resolve those in discerning their call.
That's a good question. And in some ways, the book was designed to avoid it. You know, I feel like that way of framing it has just not produced fruit. I haven't known how to do it. I haven't been utterly persuaded by the way other folks have done it. So what I've tried to do is just start from the very basic things. And what I trust is that if people practice the gentle practices with gladness and singleness of heart, the notion of vocation or call will become clearer down the road. But it's sort of like building a foundation of practice first and then seeing what emerges. It may be that you practice these gentle practices over time and then it becomes clear that, my God, I really need to exercise my creative juices by doing this writing that I always meant to do when I was a teenager, and now's the time to do that again, or something else might emerge. But start off with these basic practices first.
So Christopher, you could say in some ways, we were trying to get this bird's eye view of vocation, but we didn't have any of the foundation or the building blocks. So we were sort of flying around trying to guess.
That's the theory, yeah. Start with the prayer life first. And then,
right. Start by just doing these 7 vows and then you'll get more clear about what's next. Yes. I like that very much. Emmy, did you have a question? I thought I saw a hand. Oh, she might be talking to somebody else.
I don't quite know how to phrase it. If you're familiar with Cursillo, and we'd say, what is your apostolic plan for the week? And hold each other accountable. And I know in our group, I don't think we hold each other as accountable as we could. We know we support each other in prayer, but as far as supporting each other with our call, I'm not sure we're as strict about it as we should be. Would you say?
I agree. Yeah, I think that's our next step. We've been motivated by this book, Christopher.
This book is definitely a motivating factor, I think. And I definitely see small groups as the answer for get people to really know each other and care about each other and share the deeper things. So thank you, Christopher. I've loved it.
Oh, you're welcome, Emmy. And you remind me, in my last discipleship group, after we built up a great amount of trust, had shared spiritual autobiographies with one another, been with each other through some, traumas and transitions, we finally had a conversation where each person showed up on a particular meeting and said what they thought their vocation was and why they thought that, and got the feedback of the group. So that can certainly happen. But again, it's not a first step. It comes later, I think.
We also have my daughter-in-law from England is on here with us, I see. welcome Gretchen.
Oh, that's wonderful.
That she can take it back to England with her.
Yeah.
Good. International.
Mhm.
It's good.
Other questions? Yes, Karen.
So I love this idea of gentle practices. I was wondering if you could give us more of a definition of what you mean by gentle.
I'd be happy to, but one thing that I have to say for those of you who have read the book, Karen, have you read the book yet?
I haven't read the book yet.
Well, you're featured in it.
What?
Yeah.
You are.
So one of the practices, spoiler alert, is, and it's a mature practice. I suggest that you don't get into this until later, is to use your wound. In the vow, it says, remembering Jesus says, as the Father has sent me, so I send you. He says that when he appears to the disciples resurrected with his wounds. Right after that is the Doubting Thomas story where he put his hands in his wounds. So what I suggest is that he comes to us wounded and he sends us as wounded people. And so we are to carry wounds with us. That's part of the Christian walk. And I conclude that chapter with Karen and Brian's wedding, because for their wedding, these other parishioners at All Saints commissioned the assistant organist, who's a fabulous composer, to write anything that Karen and Brian wanted. And they chose the collect that's in Compline, "Keep watch, dear Lord, with those who work or watch or weep this night." And they specified that they wanted that because even when we were in the midst of the joy of their wedding, and it was an incredibly joyful wedding, they wanted us all to remember that there were people out there that were hurting, and that was part of all of God's creation. And it added this beautiful richness to it. And I took that as an example of people who knew the Christian truth that we're all wounded and we're all always wounded, and we're wounded healers, to use that kind of Henry Nouwen business. So look out, Karen, you're in the book.
That's great. I love
Glad
it.
we got to meet you.
Yeah. Now
And I include, but in the end notes, there's a YouTube link to the All Saints choir. I think it may be a different choir actually, singing the piece. You should check it out. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous song. So you were asking again about gentle practices. One of the people I quote several times in the book is a really influential spiritual director, English spiritual director from the early 20th century, Abbot Chapman. His spiritual letters were hugely influential. And one of the things he kept repeating over and over again was, pray as you can, don't try to pray as you can't. And what I'm inviting us to do with the gentle practices is the same thing, like try it. If it's not working, that's okay. Let it go. That's not a door that you're supposed to walk through right now. And to not beat ourselves up over this. And there's 5 or 6 practices here. And if you're like me, if you get 1 or 2 valuable things out of a book, super. That's a great book, right? So don't sort of force it and think that you have to do it all. And I just really wanted to work against this whole notion that, we needed to do all these things to get an A from Teacher God. That's not the dynamic here, that these are just doors that we're invited to go through if we wish, and if we feel like this is for us right now. So all of that's wrapped up with that word gentle for me. And that's part of what I'm trying to communicate in the book as well.
Yeah, and Christopher, I think that's so important as priests in this Christian tradition that for so many centuries was so guilt-ridden and hell-bent in a sense, that we do. It's like swimming upstream to keep reiterating again and again and again about this gentle practices. I can see now why you repeat it so much. I find the guilt is, for many people, is so overwhelming, and sometimes it's just like throwing acid on their prayer life. It's so overwhelming that they can't get started.
Yeah. Well, and it starts with my own struggles, right? I mean, the best sermons that any of us preach is always in the first instance to ourselves. So, it's a reminder to me not to beat myself up on it too.
Yeah.
So.
I think that's why I like the gladness and singleness of heart. I don't think Jesus wants us to be moping around all the time.
Yeah, beating ourselves up.
No,
Yeah.
I like that
Right.
a lot.
Linda, I saw you had a question. Linda Crofton.
Well, I just have a comment about the first chapter, and that's all I've read in it. But to me, it's the work is near you, is giving us the freedom to live in the present moment. And God's time is not our time.
Right.
So if you live with the work near you, you're in a different dimension in God's time and in his world, and you're able then to do the theotropic lean that you're talking about. And I find myself, my struggle with that is taking it back. You know, you get caught up in the daily routine and starting to try to control every little minutia that comes your way. And that the beautiful thing about that first chapter is that every time you do that, that's when you're supposed to say the work is near me, because God is with you and he's teaching you, he's bringing you through that each time. And it's a practice. So I'm thrilled to have this book. It's just wonderful.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
In that first chapter, it's saying the work is very near you, specifically in times of transition. So,
Right.
you know, I attend to, like, okay, it's when I'm walking up the stairs towards my office. I say the work is very near you. And then I that reminds me that I don't know what the work is.
You
I
don't.
think it may be one thing, but I may turn around that corner and Lori, my administrator, may say, "Oh, Christopher," you know, "Oh, there's the work."
Right. You have to be open to that. And it's it's a completely different dynamic of existence. We're not used to that. And I think it's that we're transitioning into a new century. And you talk about this a lot, Kate, in your morning sermons or your morning messages, but it's true. And I think it applies to all ages and all walks of life, because we're all transitioning into this different existence and a way of communicating. And to me, it's good and evil, and you choose the good, and the good is to look to God and that's all. I mean, it's not simple because we're human beings, but it really is not about a person or an ideal. It's really about what comes out of your mouth and what's in your heart and what's in your mind, and taking that and pushing it forward in your own presence with God. You know, or
yeah, that's very good.
Am I saying that right?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. What Christopher has done that is so brilliant is the idea of our work being one of the core aspects of our practice, but that this work is only in the present moment. It's not some ideal, it's not some futuristic thought, it's not some social media driven pondering issue. It's where are my feet moving right now, and who's speaking to me, and what am I doing? And that wakes us up out of this blur that we've been in our culture and gets us back to reality. It's very refreshing. I'm very thankful for it.
Thank you. Yeah.
Other questions? Yes, Lisa. And Lisa was one of the people that went to your retreat over in California. Right. We sent her there. Yeah.
I was. And first of all, Christopher, thank you so much for the book. I just recently got it in the last several days and have made it almost to the end. But it is quite true when you talked about how all the conversations in that particular meeting a couple of years ago went so well, and there was so much interaction, and everybody just had really good, pertinent answers. And I was really surprised. You were right. On the one-on call, at least to my group, everybody just was, all these really great, brilliant, wonderful people were just silent. And I can understand why, except for me on that particular one. And it's because at first I had been intimidated, because some of the work that people in your group have done on their own call is amazing. I may get names wrong, it's been a couple of years, but I think it was Jacob had set up a whole social service agency there based on what he had previously been doing in some sort of similar line of work. And then just moved into a whole nother, a huge, absolutely huge, wonderful thing. That's a call. That is definitely a call. Another lady, I think her name was Brigida, had set up this amazing prison ministry where I think on death row there at the prison near you, and with amazing stuff, complete with a whole center for the people who did that, and artwork from these beautiful stories from all these prisoners they've worked in. So that is very intimidating to hear, that inspiring, but yet intimidating. And for me, very quickly, I think I was the only one that kind of got it, that, yeah, I would love to set up a social service agency, but right now I had done an early retirement from a career as a hospital administrator and came home to take care of my dad with Alzheimer's. And I had realized real quickly, that's my call.
Yeah.
You know, I want to do the big social service agents. They're a big, wonderful project, but my call is just the day in and day out of taking care of somebody with dementia. And I was the only one that had, you know, like a real immediate answer. And funny thing is, since that time, I put my dad in assisted living, but now and my life changed, and my call and my, you know, work got a little different. But now I'm back to square one. I have my dad home with me since the whole lockdown thing. And it's gotten much harder. But what I wanted to say with all of this is, for me, just your words on the work is in front of me has been so powerful just in the last couple of days. Because I'm real proud of myself in some ways of how well I do. And then very quickly, like that, I can also be like the worst caregiver ever. Lose my temper, not be, patient, say something smart or, whatever. And so to me, that's a beautiful spiritual practice that I get to practice that a lot of times a day. And it's humbling, but it's still a walk. But that work is in front of me just helps me be present. Again, going back to being present and mindful, present to, it's crazy that I'm having to answer the same question 100 times, but that I'm here to provide love, comfort, security at the end of life. And that's part of the job, because there's
Yeah.
So to me, everything that we do that's hard, it's in front of us because it is our work. I mean, really, there's so much of those hard things. It's our work. And when we remember it's our work, to me, at least the last couple of days of trying that, has pulled me back in that place of compassion and brought my stress levels down where I can be effective. So I think so far, I'm just totally impressed. I think it is brilliant work in the simplicity of it and the gentleness of it. So thank you.
Yeah.
Lisa, thank you. What a great example.
One of even before the first chapter, I talk about ways of proceeding, and I mentioned 3 things: that we're going to be focusing on words, that what we're doing is just a bunch of small shifts, sort of like I talk about us improving the posture of our soul. Just as when we improve the posture of our body, it's just, putting your shoulders back a little bit. So it's not a dramatic thing. But the third thing is repetitions. So Lisa, what you just said about taking care of your father, it's like, it's the same thing every day, right? And what's that repetition like? And I referenced the movie, which I'm assuming many of you have seen, Groundhog Day, where he literally has the same day over and over again. But how we can go through the same things with slight variations that produce different outcomes, and that those repetitions are in fact a gift. And to attend to what's the repetition like today.
That's such a great example of a work, Lisa, the day in and day out caring for your dad. Thank you for that. It's a really great example of that.
Perfect.
Are there other questions or reflections?
I'll say hello, because Emmy introduced me earlier. I was not present. I'm sorry for not having my picture on. Thank you for letting me join in here. I'm sorry that I wasn't there at the start. Can I just have the name of the book, please?
With Gladness, Answering God's Call in Our Everyday Lives by Christopher Martin.
Thank you. It was really, I got there in time for him to talk about the Book of Common Prayer and how important that is to you. And I just love that. And I'm definitely going to start that tomorrow. And it's pretty exciting because I was just given by my mother, great grandfather. So her grandfather's Book of Common Prayer. He was an Episcopal priest. And
beautiful.
So that was neat. So I'll have a reason to use it every day now.
And God puts these
Yeah.
pieces in front of us when we're present to see them. Isn't that amazing? God puts these things right in the right timing, and it's once we start being awake, like Christopher's talking about, to the work that's near us, we see these things like that Book of Common Prayer. That's beautiful, Gretchen.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts or reflections from your lives before we close? This has been very rich, Christopher. A lot to ponder, a lot to chew on. I know that I've already begun to practice some of these things. Some of my favorite ones are smiling your secrets, your secret smile. Can you just mention that quickly before we close?
Sure. I'd be happy to. The practice is when nobody is looking, to smile your secret angelic smile, the smile that's the closest approximation to the smile that you're going to have in the celestial banquet. What does that smile look like? And I got the notion from Dante, where in the Paradiso, when he's going up there, all of the saints, when they receive him, they smile. Dante's clear about this over and over and over again. It's a sign of the conviviality and the joy and all of that. And then there are a couple of visual cues. One is the smiling angel of Rheem's Cathedral. If you know Gothic cathedrals, the statues of the saints and the kings and the queens and the biblical figures are generally pretty solemn and even severe sometimes. But a beautiful exception is in Rheem's Cathedral, in the front portal, where there's a famous angel, the smiling angel of Rheem's. And it's a very enigmatic and beautiful smile. So I learned my own enigmatic smile by looking at this, the angel from Rheem's, and smiling back at that angel.
Beautiful.
And the part of the practice is that it's not the fact that you remember God and beauty and then you smile. It's that you remember to smile, and the smile brings that heart curiously warmed kind of feeling by itself, just physiologically.
Yeah.
And in that moment, it's an invitation to remember that God's creation in the end is beautiful, but with a capital B, like a really high exalted sense of beauty that includes all of the woundedness and the vulnerability and the brokenness, and that all of this is caught up in God's love. And then also to not just have an attitude of gratitude, but to be gratitude. And another term for that is adoration. So it's an invitation just a couple of times a day to stop and smile and be grateful.
Thank you. That's so beautiful. Well, I see we're at the top of the hour, and this has been wonderful, Christopher. I hope those of you who haven't yet gotten the book will feel encouraged to get a copy and share it with people who you think, especially those who are alone right now. I encourage you to share it with people. Yes, Catherine has marked, we have copies in the bookstore. She is right. I think this book can help enrich people's time so that they're not lost in this pandemic. Christopher, would you close us with a prayer?
Yeah, first of all, just thank you all for coming and your wonderful questions. Kate, thank you for your very thoughtful interview questions. And it's just been a joy to be with you all. And I hope to continue to be in relationship with those of you from the Cathedral and those of you in other places as well.
Yeah, we're so grateful for you. Thank you, Christopher.
Likewise, gratitude goes both ways. Let us pray. Gracious God, thank you for this hour that we have spent together, considering the mystery of your love for us. Although we ache to be together in person again, we're grateful for this technology that allows us to at least see one another's faces and hear one another's voices. So thank you for the blessing of connecting even through distance. Lord, I ask that you bless each one of us as we go back to our ordinary lives, and ask that you guide us to live lives that are filled with gladness and singleness of heart. In the name of your Son, Jesus, I pray. Amen.
Amen. God bless you, everyone. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Christopher.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye, Sharon.
Bye.
Thank you, Kate.
Bye.